impact is.
Mention has been made of non-executive directors, and we've had comments from Harold Walker, Michael Waugh, and Professor Bob Garrett has made comments. And I look at the Financial Times, and Paul Miners, your City Minister, has made comments, Chancellor, where he says, the typical bank board represents a retirement home for the great and the good. They're the retired titans of industry, ousted politicians, and the occasional member of the voluntary sector. If such a selection more likely to be found in Debrett's peerage than the City Pages was ever good enough, it's not good now. Now look at RBS and HBOS, and it seems as if that backs it up. For example, RBS has got Bob Scott as its Senior Independent Director, formerly Group Chief Executive of CGNU, now Aviva, Colin Buchan, Head of Equities at UBS Warburg, Archie Hunter, Scottish Senior Partner at KPMG on the Institute of Chartered Accountants, Steve Robson, former Private Secretary to Chancellor, very distinguished Treasury person.
The committee's whip.
We're coming now. And then Peter Sutherland, Chairman of BP. So, with that, I'll ask you questions in 10 minutes when we resume at 17:47. Order. Chancellor, I was mentioning the non-exec directors, and I finished in Peter Sutherland. But in HBOS, we've got Sir Ron Garrick, former Chief Exec of Weir's, distinguished industrialist on 235,000, Director of Shell. We've got Anthony Hobson on 221,000, Chairman of Northern Foods. Now, these are pretty distinguished people. What happened? Were they scrutinising the chief executives? Or did the chief executives just run amok?
Well,
and they just turned up
I think
in
I was going to say that. As you read out that list, there were many people on that list who clearly had what one would treat as the relevant experience, professional qualifications, ability to read and think about what accounts mean. And, so it isn't the case that the boards of our major banks, it may have been the case 20 years ago, were stuffed with a sort of random bit of the non-relevant great and the good. They have for quite some time had often people who would appear to have the relevant technical skills. I think there is an issue, I think, about simply the total amount of time that non-execs spend on businesses as complicated as banks and insurance companies. Having been a non-executive of a bank, I had realised that to do it professionally, you really do have to put a hell of a lot of time into it. And I think we are going to have to think in future about how effectively even very competent people can really go into the detail in a, how much time they need to get into the detail. I think the other thing to say is, I do go back to the point I made earlier, a lot of very, very clever people, in regulators, in central banks, in the IMF, didn't see this thing. Yeah, well,
that's why we've got an inquiry, because it's all clever people that didn't do that. Yeah. But Governor, are you going to stick your nose into individual institutions now on these issues? And maybe be a bit sceptical.
I wouldn't use that phrase. If I could take up the question you just put about people and spotting it, I mean, it's a good question, but it's exactly the question that was asked in 1847, 1866. You can go on. And
so we're never going to change anything. So
I'm rather doubtful if the need for future inquiries will ever disappear, because banking does run these risks that every now and then there is a crisis.
So you're telling me here, though, in answer to a question, Governor, that non-execs, we can't hope for them to do their job.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that at all.
So what
I am saying is that the question you've asked is one that was asked in the past, and the fact that there is a crisis is in itself not evidence that the individuals in charge of those institutions necessarily failed.
But Governor, this is 2008. We've put £500 million into the banks. We've got 5,000 emails from people who are angry about these things. And you're telling us, look, things are going to go on as they are.
I didn't say they'll go on as...
Well, if that's not the case, phrase your answer appropriately.
What I'm saying to you, Chairman, is...
Yeah, but phrase your answer appropriately.
You and nobody else has any guarantee or any solution that will lead you to a position
But
that
Governor,
can
you were
ensure
brought
that there
here as
never
an
will be a
expert
crisis
to give us an
in the future.
idea of the way forward.
We have, and I've all the way through
Well,
this
tell us,
process.
other than
I
we'll
will-
see this again in 20 years' time.
I will
Give
tell
us
you
some comfort.
Exactly, and ever since I came to this committee first, back in last September, I have spelt out for you exactly the direction in which you should go, and I'm glad to say you've listened. First of all,
Thank
we
you very
needed,
much.
and now we're going to get, a resolution framework for dealing with failing banks. Secondly, we needed a reform of the deposit insurance system,
Yeah.
and I'm delighted to say that your committee has followed that advice and has endorsed
But
it.
Governor, my question
Can
is
I
about
keep going
non-exec
to what else we
directors.
need to do?
Exactly.
Thirdly, regulation of liquidity. And then it comes to the international arena, and I've already explained we will need higher capital requirements, we will need counter-cyclical capital requirements, and at the international
Governor,
level, we
understand
will
that,
also
and
need
that was in
liquidity
our
regulation.
report. How can we get better, more alert non-exec directors?
That's a matter for the companies themselves. If you want to impose that centrally from government, essentially you're saying you want nationalised companies. Private companies have themselves to choose the right people for the job.
Governor, I think you're way off the mark there. I think-
Some
exactly.
banks
You know,
haven't had the problem.
Exactly.
Some banks haven't